for me. I have a say in my own destiny. Here on the job, no, it is not hard to see.
Welcome to Labor's View. This show is brought to you by the very hardworking and dedicated employees, non-supervisory employees of the Essex County Division of Welfare. They're members of CWA Local 1081. I'm president of the union and host of this show, Labor's View. This evening we have a distinct pleasure of having with us Catherine Wilson, who is the acting CEO of the United Way of Essex and West Hudson. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
For full disclosure, I've been on the board, I think it's at least 20 years. Because I got awards from 20 years ago from the United Way and stuff. So, so things have changed a great deal with the United Way. But before we get to the United Way, I'd like a little bit of background about you, please, for our viewers.
Sure. Well, I actually used to be a member of the CWA. In 2001, I came to Newark to work for DIFUS. So I worked there for about 2.5 years in one of the local offices. And then after that, I went to work for Casa for Children of Essex for about 6 years. And then I transitioned. Let me stop it.
Casa was a nonprofit that worked for, I think they just stopped it.
They actually work in conjunction with the courts to advocate for children who are in foster care. Right. So, worked there for about 6 years and then transitioned over to United Way about 6 years ago. It'll be 6 years in June.
Are you an attorney?
No, not
Good.
an attorney.
That's very nice.
Social worker.
Nor am I.
Yeah.
Although I go up against attorneys every day.
They're good people. They serve a good purpose.
Bottom of the ocean. No. So, you came to the United Way of Essex West Hudson, which catchment area is what?
The catchment area is 13 municipalities. So it's Newark, and it's most of the surrounding region. It's Newark, it's Irvington, it's all of the Oranges, it's Maplewood, it's Harrison, Nutley, Kearney, and Belleville. Okay. So there's 13 altogether. Primarily the work that we do is mostly focused on Newark and the Oranges. A lot of the work we do in literacy, that expands out to some of the other Irvington, Harrison, Nutley, Kearney areas.
Why don't we go into some of the programs that are systemic, if you will, or have been at least for a number of years?
Sure. So actually, I think our longest running program you're familiar with is Celebrity Read,
yes,
which every February volunteers sign up to go into the local schools and read to school children. It started as an initiative for African American History Month, so it was mainly African American males who went into the school to talk about, to not only read to the kids, but also talk about where they were in their careers and why reading was important, and then expanded, of course, to both genders and people of all backgrounds. So actually this past year we worked with our highest number of schools, which was 30 schools, and we had over 300 volunteers. So again, that's the longest running program. I think that's been going on actually since 1990, so quite a long time.
It was going on back when I first started.
Yeah. And so in addition to that, we've had a lot of focus for the last 5 years on literacy. We've been involved in the national campaign for grade level reading. We're trying to get all kids reading on grade level by the 3rd grade, because we know that when kids read on grade level by 3rd grade, they can graduate from high school and are more likely to go on to college.
Formative years.
Those are their formative years.
Wonder Bread used to say.
So apparently in the 3rd grade, that's when students stop learning how to read and they read to learn. And so that's what's so critical about that. So we have a couple of early literacy programs. We have Raising a Reader, which is for our preschoolers. This past winter, we launched a partnership with My Very Own Library, which goes from kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade, where students get to build their own home libraries. And then we're also continuing with some other literacy projects in partnership with the mayor's office across the city and the Read and Believe
Mayor
campaign.
Of Newark.
Yes, the mayor of Newark.
Osborog.
Yep.
Okay, those are some systemic issues.
Mm-hmm.
What newer issues are or is the United Way of Essex West Hudson involved in?
I would
As if I don't know. But
right. Well, immediately in the past several weeks, if that's what you're referring to, mostly we've been looking at this lead in the water issue. We created the Newark Water Fund so that people could donate funds for United Way to either purchase water or then provide funding to either the district or the city as needed to support their
school
efforts.
district.
The school district.
which is still overseen by the state.
It is, correct. Mostly we would be talking to the district around what kinds of needs they have for water, for the purchase of water. My understanding is they're also looking at how they can address this issue through the use of filters and things of that nature for the immediate short-term relief of what's happening. Because as you know, they're not using any of the drinking water, and they also don't have water to cook with, so that's also all bottled water as well.
Now, this affects, I believe, at least half of the Newark public schools.
It's 30 schools within the district,
Right,
correct.
including my old grammar school. I don't. Is Dayton Street affected?
I
know
don't
Mount
know
Vernon is.
if Dayton Street is actually still there.
My grammar school's gone?
It might be gone.
Oh, because I know the project next door where I live, Seth Boyden, has been shut down.
Yes.
So maybe that's why the school.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then up to Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon is one of the
Yes.
schools involved in this.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is up in the west ward of Newark, where I have some very fond memories and some things I can't talk about, but having lived in Ivy Hill. But can you explain I know you're a lay person on this, but I know you've done some research and would have general knowledge. Can you explain some of the dangers that lead in water, or lead, the previous issue had been lead in paint. It still exists.
Yes.
But now it's water, because it started with Flint, and now they discovered it with Newark, and now it's all over the country.
Yes.
So what's wrong with lead? What's the problem?
So basically the issue is a little bit different than Flint. Flint actually has actual lead in their water, whereas in Newark, the lead does not actually exist in the water. It comes from the pipes, and the pipes are made of lead. Exactly. It comes from what we refer to as the infrastructure, or the pipes that is delivering the lead. So the issue with lead is that for children, especially younger children, 3, 4, 5 years old, those formative years that I think you mentioned previously, can cause serious health issues. It can stunt brain development. It can create issues for a child, learning disabilities. I once knew a child who had severe learning disabilities due to high exposure of lead levels. So what's really important about this is if a child has in fact attended that school, they absolutely need to get tested. And there's a time frame. They absolutely should be tested within the 30 days of being exposed so that they can ensure that they've caught it and try to use they have a method of remediation which I don't really understand.
It's called chelation.
Yes.
It's the injection of chemicals into the body. It used to be very painful, but they've developed it over time, so it's not as frightening as it used to be. Just like with rabies.
Right.
Same thing happened. The rabies shots are not as, they used to be, not that I ever had it, but they were my mother was a nurse. My mother, in fact, was the night director of nurses for Martland Hospital, which was the hospital in Newark back in the 50s and 60s.
That's right.
Then they switched over to UMDMJ.
Yeah.
So chelation it can help reduce, but my understanding is it doesn't necessarily totally eliminate.
No, it doesn't.
And therefore, the adverse effects are actually, if not caught in time, or if the levels are high enough, especially with younger children, because they're forming.
That's right.
Physically and mentally, it actually reduces the IQ.
That's
and
right.
If it's not caught, it's irreparable.
Right. That's right. It becomes a lifelong issue. As I said, it can create brain damage for younger children. As you said, it can reduce their IQ. It can create all kinds of learning disabilities. It can also create physical issues later on. So in any event, it's not good. And as you said, this in Newark actually is an old problem because of the fact that Newark is populated with older buildings. And we have a lot of families who either own or rent apartments in some of these really old houses where there's lots of chipping paint. And one of the things that we've learned is that oftentimes paint was painted over lead paint.
Yes.
So if you painted over lead paint and that paint starts coming off, you'll start to expose the lead paint, and there's chips, and kids pick it up and they put things in their mouths, especially young kids. So that is also an issue that continues to be a problem. There's not an extremely high population of that, but it's over 3% in the city of Newark that there are kids who are affected by that. So in addition to making sure that your child is tested if they've been exposed to the water issue, you may also want to start looking at, the dwelling of where you live to ensure that there is no exposure to lead paint.
Lead paint, I believe, was eliminated in '75.
Yes, it was. It was.
They made, and it also lead. I'm an old timer, so people don't realize that lead was an additive in gasoline because it kept the engines from knocking.
Right.
In fact, I have an old. I'm being redundant. I have a '67 Caddy convertible, which hasn't moved in 3 years. I'm trying to get it out, but I actually have to put a non-lead but lead-like additive every time I get a tank of gasoline, because the old cars need that, or else you hurt the pistons and the damage. So lead was very, very prevalent.
Yes.
Throughout, just like asbestos used to be extremely prevalent.
It was also painted, toys were painted with lead.
Yes. Well, some in China still are.
Right.
That's why I don't espouse anyone respectfully buying anything from China.
Right.
Anything, food or anything else. I've seen what they do.
Right.
And being a vegan, I'm particularly sensitive to that.
Yeah. So I think that for United Way, one of the things that we wanted to do in creating the fund was to also create an awareness campaign for parents around getting tested and the effects that lead can have on your child.
Yeah, I've got a memo that you sent out to the board or the executive committee, and it gives a breakdown. If you don't remember by rote, these are some of the procedures. Is there anything that perhaps you missed there?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that right now it's not actually the law that schools test water.
That wasn't I. That's AOL saying goodbye.
Yeah. It's not the law that schools actually test their water. So NPS was actually testing their own water, and they had discovered this and determined that it was time to shut off the water fountains and raise the red flag. So that's important to remember. In addition to that, we're also working with United Way Worldwide to bring this issue, because as you mentioned, it is also an issue in Flint. And unfortunately, because the United States is full of old infrastructure, it's a problem now across the country. Districts are starting to look at, is this an issue? And it's not just school districts, it's also cities and municipalities that are also looking at this issue.
Well, we've seen an interesting reaction from our governor. Here's an article from the, I believe it is the Star Ledger, March 13th. The title is, "On Lead Poisoning, Christie Advises We Take a Chill Pill." Now, I'm not trying to politicize the United Way. I know that's not a wise thing for you guys to do. From a union perspective, it's absolutely, especially based upon his history. But I think half of what he's saying is technically accurate in that, as I think you stated earlier, the levels of lead in the water are not necessarily, especially as I've read, in many of the schools, are not of a level that becomes. There's a term that they use. I forgot the term, but a couple of schools have very, like 500 parts per billion or whatever, which is very problematic.
It's problematic, and some of them are lower than others. Obviously, I believe that the EPA's standard is 5. Is it 5 parts per billion?
I think that
is the standard, and so they're higher than they should be, and I think the governor is correct on. Look, the buildings aren't on fire at this point, but there is cause for concern and there is cause for caution, and parents, as we know, need to get information to make informed decisions for their students, and parents in Newark especially, because oftentimes there is a lack of information or resources or transparency, and so I think that's why it's important for the information to get out there.
Well, there's one article here that's from March 11th that Newark school officials knew of lead risks in 2014 based on a memo from the state. So it's not as though this were brand new.
It's not a new issue
to the school system. And in fact, my friend John Abignon, who is now the president of the Newark Teachers Union, he has come out saying that he and his union has made the state, since they're in charge of the school system still, aware that, and they had made the city aware previously, apparently, that the filters on the water that had not been replaced
Right.
in many of these schools for many, they weren't regularly replaced as required with a requisite schedule.
Right.
So, I mean, that's something else that one has to take into account. And it really goes down to the systemic issue of just the age of the schools and, as you say, their internal infrastructure. And whether you replace a school or not, minimally they're going to have to replace these pipes, and it's going to cost millions of dollars,
Right.
which nobody apparently has it now.
To your point earlier about your school, 1955, 1960, you're talking over 50, 60 years ago. And there are schools that are, from 1915, 1920, 1930. So those pipes may at one point have been replaced. They have not been replaced in a long time.
Well, I told you I went to St. Charles before we started on Custer Avenue, which is, I don't know if it's even there anymore either. But there was a little Catholic school for 2 years. And that had to have been built in the 1800s.
Sure.
I mean, it was old then. And I have no doubt I have lead in my system because my mental facilities are clearly a result of something. Here's an article, Lead Poisoning in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, even worse than Flint. It says that the state's own data shows that 18 cities in Pennsylvania and 11 cities in New Jersey may have an even higher share of children with dangerously elevated levels of lead than does Flint.
Right.
And not even talking about Newark, they're talking about other cities.
Right. Those, I think, were identified before Newark had even discovered the issue this year and turned off the water. And again, those are municipalities where resources are stretched, where information is not always available. And so it's really, really important for people to be aware that, there could be an issue. And you can also test the water in your home. You can get a lead test and actually test for lead in your home.
Well, it's interesting how topical this can become, because this article indicates that Freddie Gray, whose death sparked a number of injuries at riots in Baltimore, when he was killed by the police, that he had been tested for lead as a child 6 times, according to the Baltimore Sun, and that he and his 2 sisters had lead levels between 11 and 19 micrograms, according to legal documents, so therefore leading to multiple educational, behavior, and medical problems, which leads me to be concerned about the lead levels in particularly youth that are in urban youth not jails, but youth houses, they call them, detention facilities, and whether or not any of the behaviors can be attributed to having ingested lead as children and having impaired cognitive abilities to the extent where obviously your judgment would be impaired and you would do things that normally you wouldn't do, such as illegal activities.
Correct.
Because your sense of values is altered.
Well, I think that's a great point because, as I said, the lead levels, depending on how high it is, can affect brain development. And if there's not proper brain development, then we have brain damage. And then we have, like you said, there can be lack of judgment, there can be lack of understanding, there can be lack of cognition. A lot of kids end up, the highest diagnosis right now for young people, they have ADD, they have ADHD, they have oppositional defiant disorder. Those types of diagnoses are coming out. And in many cases, it's a result because their lead levels were high. Anything over 11, clearly an issue. But I've also had kids where their lead levels were over 20. And those kids, they actually had to be institutionalized because of it. And it was all based on lead being in the home.
Which is obviously so antithetical to logic when it comes to expenditures. It's almost like the old television commercials for Fram oil filters. You pay me now or you pay me later if you don't get your oil changed.
Right.
I don't mean to minimize or make a direct correlation, but it's true. I mean, you don't replace how much are you spending on institutionalization, whether it be in institutes for children that are impaired to the extent that the parents can't take care of them, or perhaps youth housing. That's one of my pushes, is try to get the youth housing and even the prisons, the jails, the county jail, for example, and or the state prisons. I think they should be testing there as well to see if there's any impacts on people. And it's not just people of color. There are a lot of people that are in prison but mostly of color, mostly African American, unfortunately, and especially in New Jersey, that grew up in urban areas that very well could have been exposed to lead and had that adversely affect them. This article is indicating that in Pennsylvania, 13,000 children under the age of 7 were known to have lead levels above 5, which is the demarcation. And according to 2014 childhood lead surveillance report in New Jersey that year, more than 5,400 were over 5.
That's right.
That's pretty scary, you know. And it says, in addition to the burden on the healthcare system, there's also cost to, as you say, special education for children with neurological damage, and down the line, courts and prisons bear the load of the behavior, as I just indicated. So this is it's almost a perverse blessing that Flint occurred.
I think in some ways it is, because as much as we don't want those families, those children to have to go through it, it is a spotlight on, this issue, not just there, but across the country. And, lawmakers need to start looking at how do we address this issue, because it's not going to go away and we can't ignore it. Our kids, their health is, of vital importance. And also, as you said, the strain on the infrastructures that are in place, it needs to be addressed, definitely.
Well, in terms of addressing it, here's an article, Passaic Valley Water Commission. They're expanding testing for lead in their entire water supply. That's a good thing, because they service thousands, 25,000 households with the water. Congressman Menendez, Senator Menendez, he's putting forward a bill to tackle lead poisoning in low-income housing.
And the Newark Housing Authority also has done, in the past couple of weeks, testing within some of their facilities. Their results have not been made public yet, but they did, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, start testing different sites that they actually have. Because some of their housing is...
They don't have many projects, as we use COG. I lived them, and South William was one of a housing authority, as was where I lived in the park. That was the housing authority. They don't really have many left, thank goodness. Well, not really. Actually, our local was part of a coalition that sued the housing authority for 21 years with Judge Deverbois, who just passed, because they were tearing down these projects like Hayes Homes and Scudder Homes, but not replacing them one for one, so people had no place to go, and just exacerbating the homeless situation, which exacerbates the stability or lack of stability for children, which exacerbates their behavior in many instances, their ability to learn. If you don't have if you're living out of a plastic bag in some Carlton hotel, you're not apt to be paying too much attention to your schoolwork.
I also think that it's important that there are many families living, to your point, the Carlton Hotel, the hotel over on Elizabeth Avenue, whose name I can never remember, on the corner there. Welfare, the state of New Jersey is paying for families to stay in some of those hotels.
Paying dearly.
It's paying dearly, and so maybe it's imperative for them to also become involved and say, hey, you know what? We need to make sure that where families are dwelling, that it is safe.
Well, unfortunately, going back to our governor, his budget continues, according to this article, to deplete the lead abatement fund. He took $10 million from the fund and redirected it to the Treasury. And even though the Democrats tried to, they did pass bills respectively in the Assembly and the Senate, he vetoed them because he said they were additional appropriations and they should put it in the budget. Again, no comment requested politically. And we also have Democratic lawmakers. Here's an article from the 7th where you have, I believe, our own Senator Rice Yes.
Yeah.
Ron Rice, who's from the West Ward.
Yes.
Used to be a congressman from the city councilman, as is his son now. No, his son's not now.
Not anymore.
He used to be.
Yep.
And also Senator, I believe Ruiz is involved
Yes.
in this, in pushing several measures to protect kids from dangerous levels of lead. So it's getting the attention, as I said earlier, perhaps perversely so, but whatever the impetus, so be it.
Hopefully there will be continued forward movement on that.
Let's go to a lighter topic. Another issue that of recent that the United Way of Essex Hudson board is undertaking is in relation to the 350th anniversary of the founding of the city of Newark. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, as you said, the 350th anniversary of the city of Newark is this year, and there's lots of activities that are happening throughout the city, and the board wanted to recognize this milestone within Newark, and so decided to host a William Ashby breakfast, which it has done for several years, and for many years, I believe it did that annually. They handed out the Ashby Awards.
I was actually the MC on a number of them.
There you go, and Dr. Clem Price, who spearheaded the last several of them prior to his death.
He was a professor at Rutgers.
Yes.
And his wife was the curator of the Newark Museum until she retired.
That's right, and Dr. Price was actually a friend of William Ashby.
Yes, he was.
And so the Ashby Award really is meant to highlight individuals who are contributing to the fabric of their communities.
And Dr. Ashby lived, I believe, till about 101.
He did.
And he actually came up from the South, integrated. He was the first black social worker in New Jersey in 1917.
That's right.
And years later, he founded the Urban League in Newark.
He did.
And the years after World War I, he was instrumental in founding the Community Chest, which became
the United Way.
The United Way.
That's right.
So it's bringing everything home.
It is.
He was an amazing individual. I think I might have met him once, many, many years ago. And we did have that award, which we've given to people, many people, Steve Adebayo Sr.,
former Governor Kane.
Former Governor Kane, and with the television, the guy used to do, he passed on now. He did his television show, and he actually worked worked for the court on that lawsuit. He worked for Debevoise as the mediator. Gus Henningberg.
Oh, okay.
He was my instructor in college because I took Black Studies as a major, and he never liked me saying that because it made him feel old.
Right.
But Gus, in his later years, never wore a tie, as I refused to wear ties. And so when I emceed that event, at the end of it, I said, "Let's everybody emulate Gus," and we all took off our ties and had a great time. And we used to have them at the Newark Club.
We used to have them at the Newark Club, and then for a couple years we did it at NJ Pack. And I don't want to say where it's going to be this year because I'm not exactly sure, but I suspect it will be back at the Newark Club this year.
Nice venue.
Yeah, it's a great venue. We just had a breakfast there, so.
This has been a great venue.
Yes.
Catherine Wilson, thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you.
And thank you to Watching Labor's View. I'm David Weiner, your host, and we hope to see you on future shows.
Here on the job, no, it is not hard to see that it's the